And good.
And we're recording.
All right. Everything good on your end, Jeff?
Yeah.
All right. Well, hi, guys. My name is Micah Sanchez. I am a flight instructor, Gold Seal, CF double I. We'll talk about that throughout the presentation. But without further ado, let's get into it. So a little bit about me. Aviation has always been in my family. My mom was a flight attendant. My uncle was an airline pilot. And there's actually some aviators in way back when family history, which we'll get into. So if I knew I always wanted to be a pilot, I'd put all my eggs in one basket with this. And look at where we'll talk about where we're at right now. Jeff mentioned I started at Hiller as the simulator instructor in the flight sim zone as I think as young as I'm trying to remember, like 14, 13, somewhere around there. And that only just cemented all my aspirations. I became very involved with San Carlos. When I was a pilot, I rented from lots of schools there. I work at Surf Air, which is the regional airline out of there. And now I have about 1,700 hours. I'm still instructing at San Carlos right now. But this is kind of my journey on going from that little kid in the simulator at the museum to now where I'm at now. So there's a picture of me. My mom would always make sure to get me into that cockpit because she was like I said, she was a flight attendant for United. So I enjoyed the being in the plane more than the vacation itself sometimes. Just being in the cockpit was I guess cooler than going to like Chicago for a weekend. And I never knew what it was, but I remember as a kid, I didn't know what adrenaline was, but I could just feel just sitting in the seat, just adrenaline. So I knew that's always what I wanted to do. My dad purchased Flight Simulator 1998 when I was when I was 4 years old. And that kind of was my first like physical flying, I guess, I mean, I know it's on a computer, but that's what helped. And from then on, it was Flight Simulator. I feel like if it wasn't for Flight Simulator, I probably still would have gotten where I am now, but it kind of accelerated it and kept me focused throughout all grade school, high school, and all that. So that's what it looked like in 1998. And it still remains a big part of who I am. And look at how far we've come. This is the newest flight simulator. And I always tell my students when I'm training them, if you guys have a computer at home, this is the best way you can practice your skills. So I have a video, if anyone, I thought this was pretty interesting on the history of Flight Simulator and just to see how far Microsoft has taken this from a little pixelated game to now this is actually helping my students. And it does, because for my students that do have simulator, I know on the first lesson that they can hold altitude and headings and all that just because of that they've played a game on their computer. So here's kind of the history with Flight Simulator. So I think it's pretty amazing how far we've come from just those little colorful squares to simulating the entire world. So it's still a big part, and I just that's huge part of my aviation background. This was my first intro flight. My dad pulled me out of class early, saying we have to go do an important errand, and he blindfolded me and took off the blindfold, and there was a plane sitting in front of me. So that was kind of the first flight that I had, and thankful for him getting Flight Simulator and him doing the intro flight. Without all that, it really helped me where I am right now. Um, so basically Jeff mentioned, I mean, that's me working at the museum, working at as a simulator instructor, and then there's Surf Air. So this was during high school. This is my kind of high school jobs was at the airport. I tried to go the military route, and so I tried to go to Colorado, to Boulder, and join Air Force ROTC. I did the aerospace engineering program. I thought I could do the aerospace engineering because I mean I got straight A's in high school, so I thought why not? And first calculus test I did 48%. So I realized, yeah, maybe I need to switch this up. So I switched degrees, but the worst news was I'm actually allergic to poultry. If there's anyone here that's allergic to chicken, let's go have a drink because I feel like I'm the only person on the planet that has that allergy. The Air Force didn't like that, and they medically discharged me from the ROTC, which I had no idea that that would be an issue. But so that was I finished college not knowing how I would. I mean, I had a couple hours here and there, but I was like, man, how am I going to get to that end goal of sitting in that big jet? So by the grace of the universe, one door closed and another opened, because 2 weeks after I got that letter from the Air Force, my uncle in Hawaii opened up a flight school, and he said, come work for me and come get I'll take care of your licenses. Just pay me back by giving me 3 years of your time as an instructor. So I mean, there's not many wannabe pilot nephews in the world that have an uncle that opens a flight school and says, "Oh, I'll pay for your flight training," and then I have to give back 3 years of instruction. So, again, that is amazing how Air Force shut the door, and then that opportunity comes by, and I'm like, "Wow, what a thank you." So I did that. I owe everything to this man right here. This is Reggie Perry. This is my mom's brother. He was an airline pilot. He was a major in the Army. He did 2 tours in Kuwait. When he got back from service, he always had this entrepreneurial slash pilot slash military mind. So he combined everything and found the niche and basically opened up an FBO at this airport on the west side of Oahu. And it took a lot of his savings. It took a lot of his time, but in the end, he actually did very well for himself. He was getting C5s and C17s, taking millions of gallons a year, and he's selling them fuel, giving them service. And basically, Hickam Air Force Base is the main base on Hawaii. So when that base is full, the Air Force comes to this airport, and they like his airport because they can get out, drink a beer, get free cars, go to the beach. Whereas if they land at Hickam, it's saluting and marching, and it's a little bit more strict when they land at the base. So the flight commanders love coming here. So I owe everything to him because of the money he got from this business, the Barbers Point Aviation Services, he opened up Barbers Point Flight School. So the flight school was just his hobby. It was just his pet project that it wasn't making money. The fueling services was basically paying for the flight school, but that's just how much he cared about it. And he realized that there was no flight school on the west side of the island. So that's what he opened. Little bit about the airport. It's called Kalaeloa Airport, and it used to be John Rogers Naval Air Station. There's a picture of it with some F-86 Sabres. And if you can see down there on the ramp, there's a bunch of P-3 Orions, and we'll get into that. But basically, this was the airport on the west side of the island that was actually attacked first on Pearl Harbor, because the Japanese attacked the airfields first because they knew if any of our fighter pilots got up in the air, it would have been a short day. So, and I have pictures of kind of the aftermath of that. But that was the airport. And the P-3 Orions were, I'll show you a picture of that. So that's what the airport was. The airport was named after this guy, Commander John Rogers. Pretty amazing story, actually. He was the first person to attempt powered flight, or flight for that matter, from California to Hawaii. And long story short, there was 4 airplanes. The Navy stationed ships every 100 miles from here to Hawaii, from California to Hawaii. And they attempted a flight, and 3 of them crashed. John Rogers got the farthest. The 3 that crashed got picked up by the Navy. They spaced them out smartly. But John Rogers, with headwind, actually ran out of fuel, crashed his airplane 400 miles off Kauai, and then fashioned the wreckage into a sailboat and sailed 400 miles north of Kauai to the harbor of Kauai. And I think that's a movie right there. Like, I don't get why Hollywood hasn't jumped on that, because that's an amazing story. And the craziest thing about this is I am actually related to him. So it's like, what are the odds that the airport that he's named after is the airport that my uncle opens up an flight school. And so it's just so many things connecting. So that's the guy. That's a picture of him on the left when he was doing his testing for the trials, basically trials for the flights. Those are the planes that they flew from California to Hawaii. And so the reason why he could fashion it into a sailboat is because the plane was kind of already a boat. So I'm not sure how they did it, but those wings back then were fabric. So I'm sure they fashioned something like that. So these are the P-3 Orions that I was mentioning. They're not there anymore, but this is kind of an old picture. They're basically the submarine hunters. So this is the wing that was stationed at the base before it became Kalaeloa Airport. And the P-3 Orions, they would drop basically sonar bombs to find submarines. So these were the submarine hunters. And I thought it was pretty cool. They're very loud, burns a lot of gas. You could just see the inefficiencies of the engines on takeoff every time they took off, but very, very cool aircraft. Yeah. This is another wing. This is a picture I took of an F-4 Phantom at the airport. So there's a lot of history at this airport. It's actually, there's a museum there. It's not like a normal little civilian. It's a civilian airport with a lot of history. So this was the first week I got to Hawaii, and I made this, and this is kind of like how I assimilated. I call this assimilating to paradise. So that was basically, I realized, oh, wow, I'm pretty lucky, because there's definitely uglier places to learn how to fly. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I definitely understood I was blessed. So training started I got my private pilot in 30 days, my private pilot's license, only because I was flying twice a day, studying in between. I would get dropped off at like 9 in the morning and then leave at 10 o'clock at night because I needed to get done. The quicker I became an instructor, the quicker I could start paying my uncle back. So he accelerated my training. Some would argue maybe too fast, but it happened, and it's I guess that's a good story to tell, that I got that in 30 days. Um, this is some of when I was learning. So not they don't make any planes like this. So Cessna doesn't make any planes like this anymore. But I'm sure maybe some of you know that you can navigate by using old school navigation and pen and using pulling on a map and drawing on a pencil and using a plotter. Nowadays, all the kids just click direct and takes them right to it. And they just there's a good book. It's called Following the Magenta Line, and it basically talks about complacency now with people because they're so used to the technology. But this stick and rudder skills right here is I'm glad that I at least have that in my background, which every pilot should still practice. And with my students, I still make them do this, even if we're in the nicest plane. You still got to know how to. You can't just rely on technology to fly the airplane for you. These are some of the pictures I took while training. So, like I said, very beautiful. Very easy to get distracted while practicing maneuvers or listening to your instructor. But the funny thing was, my instructor was my cousin. And this was basically my uncle's firstborn son. And he never wanted to be a pilot. And he knew I always wanted to be a pilot since I was 4 or 5. So he decided one year, hey, I want to become a pilot. So my uncle sent him to flight school. He got his instructor license, and now he's my instructor. So it was kind of weird that the guy who just decided to become a pilot is now your instructor when you have been wanting this for such a long time. But he was great. It was fun. You can definitely say different things when you're learning with a family member. kept me focused. This is one of the planes I flew. My uncle always prided himself on always having the best airplanes. This was actually a Cessna. They took out the avgas engine and put in a diesel engine that actually ran on jet fuel, which is kind of weird for a little general aviation aircraft, but it was awesome. Glass panels. It had FADEC. FADEC is basically, it stands for Full Authority Digital Engine Control. It's basically you move a lever and the computer is telling the engine what to do. So for a little tiny Cessna like this, that technology was overkill. But it was cool to fly. I didn't like it though, because twice after taking off while training, or no, not while, sorry, while instructing, the engine puttered and I had 2 partial power losses 200 feet off the ground in these. That was kind of knock on wood, the scariest I've ever felt while flying. It's not fun to lose half your engine 200 feet off the ground. I think these planes were too much. I think Cessna went too much on these planes, and there's a reason why the old planes are still functional, because it works. But yeah, I handled the situation. We had parallel runways. I had half an engine, so I did what's called the impossible turn. The impossible turn is basically when you're training, if your engine fails while taking off, you do not turn back to the runway, even though that's what your human instincts will say, because you are going to stall the plane and it won't work. But I had half an engine. Half an engine was enough to take me back to the runway. So that's the scary story, I guess, the only scary story I had while flying in Hawaii. This is instrument training. I got my instrument in 2 months. If people don't know what instrument is, basically instrument rating allows you to fly in bad weather. So using these glass panels only made it way easier, just being able to see where the plane is. So I put this on here just to show you how dark it is in the islands. There is no, when all of our flights were over the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and the shortest leg from island to island was 25 minutes. So when you're halfway between islands, and you're flying at night, it looks like someone just glued a piece of black construction paper onto the windshield, and you cannot see anything. So having this panels and it made it a little bit easier, but still, it was definitely. I mean, I fly at night in the Bay Area now, and it's doing it in Hawaii really made it easy because or doing it here is now easy because you get lights. So it was interesting. This is our multi-engine. Again, just every morning I was reminded of the beauty of the airport and of the state. This was one of the other planes we got. It's called a Tecnam 2010, and it's an Italian made. And the Italians pride themselves on, their sleekness. So you can almost tell that this is Italian. The inside had like full leather seats. It looked like a Ferrari. So you can tell how much my uncle cared about the flight school. Again, to remind you guys, the flight school wasn't making money, but my uncle kept giving the flight school the best airplanes because the fueling side of the company was doing so well. And that was our competitive advantage, because the only other flight school on the island had old planes. They had way more planes, but they were very old. So we got a lot of traffic because students really appreciated how much my uncle was investing in just having state-of-the-art equipment. This was when I passed my instrument check card with my cousin, Vincent. I got my commercial in 2 months. So you can tell how, for those who don't know, this is very accelerated. Most people get their private license in 4 to 6 months, just the first one. So I'm having to get everything in about 9 months. So that's how much it was. A lot of hard work. I didn't really have time to go to the beach a lot in the whole 9 months while I was there. It was a bunch of studying. That's the Cessna 310. That was the multi-engine. So this is a cool video showing you what commercial training looks like. You actually have to shut off an engine in flight and restart it and hold altitude, hold heading. And I had a great instructor for my commercial. He was actually a Hawaiian Airlines captain that was a friend of my uncle's. So it was very cool. It's weird when you're flying with a captain teaching you little like twin engine stuff like this, because on the jets it's not as difficult as this. So you can see me running, right? You can see me running the checklist. Basically, I'm sure there's lots of pilots in here, but for those who don't know, if you have an engine failure on a multi-engine like that, the plane is going to want to turn and yaw really hard to one side because you lost energy on that side. So in this plane especially, it's 285 horsepower on each engine. So when you lose one side, your quadriceps hate you. It's a huge leg workout to keep the plane straight, because you're having to force that rudder in the back to offset those asymmetrical forces. Even the examiner, when I did my test in this plane, the examiner was like, "Are you sure you want to do it in that plane?" Because it's not a trainer, but it's the only one we got, so it was good. And I got my high performance training in that too, so it's pretty cool. There's when I passed my flight instructor, it's kind of funny. All my licenses were gotten in this little old 1972 150. It's my baby. I love it. So the FAA changed the rules. You could actually get all your licenses in a plane like this. So little weird to do a flight instructor license in such a, I guess, easy airplane. But obviously the test is not easy because you got to know a lot. You got to know everything and you can't get anything wrong. These are a couple of highlights of my training. So there's some of the students that I had on the left. We would do group sessions together, teach them how to navigate in the islands. So, and it was great because you can see, like, I had kids, I had adults with who had kids. It's very different in the islands. Teaching here, everyone's like a Tesla engineer or a Apple like product development manager. It's so weird to just see the difference between Hawaii and here. On the right, this is General Ray Johns, very good friend of mine, well, friend of my uncle's, but became a good friend of mine. He's a retired 4-star Air Force general, and he flew a guy named President Bush. He was the Air Force One captain, and I did his CFI training, basically. He had his military licenses, obviously, but he wanted to get his single engine instructor license. So I'm not sure if you guys can imagine, but it's pretty weird when you're training a guy who flew Air Force One. That blew my mind, but he was such a great guy. Awesome man. And now he's a business partner with my uncle right now. Very, very important. He was actually the first person to stall a 747. He was a test pilot with, like, I think 10,000 hours of test flying, something like that. I asked him how it was stalling the 747. He said, well, you got to do it really high up because you lose about 10,000 feet. So I wish he had the video, but he was an awesome guy. This guy on the left, his name is James Asquith. It's pretty cool guy. He's actually the youngest person. I flew with him. I did a tour with him. He's the youngest person to visit all countries on the planet. He's only like 29 and he's visited all the countries, every single country in the world. I don't know how he did it. I don't know where he gets the money, but awesome guy, very cool to fly with. This guy on the right, he was the I had to document this. That was the first signature that I signed as an instructor. So very proud of that. And that was actually right after I passed my exam. He as the examiner was leaving the flight school, he walked in wanting to do an intro flight. So that was kind of surreal to be like, oh yeah, sure, I'll take you. This is a video I made of basically what instruction was like. This was only my first 100 hours, but this is kind of like what my job was every day when I became an instructor. And again, blessed beyond belief.
I remember how we used to be free. Listen to nothing but our feelings. Walk to the sound of our own drums beating. Oh, we locked ourselves away inside of the beast. But we're only waiting for the moment to break free.
So very beautiful, very beautiful. But here, learning in Hawaii was not all peaches and roses. It was actually always very windy. This was, I'll start with the picture on the right. This is what happens when you don't tie down your aircraft. Um, we got wind gusts just out of nowhere and lift. I mean, obviously the guy didn't care about his airplane. You can clearly see from the underneath of it. But yeah, and then this on the left, this was actually not one of our planes, but it was actually a check ride. A student was doing his private pilot check ride, and they got a huge gust of a crosswind, and didn't, I guess, I don't really know what happened, but basically the wingtip hit the runway. You can see my uncle there in the blue, and then the guy behind them is actually the examiner. And this is the first time I ever drove a forklift. The first time using a forklift was actually trying to lift the wing off the concrete that was melted and fused with the concrete, because the right side of the plane caught fire, and it welded the wing to the surface. So that was a long day. Everyone was fine, but it was really reminded students and myself of like, yeah, you got to have your own personal minimums. You don't want to be flying in super strong conditions, because it would get pretty windy. But great place to learn, because now you know how to handle wind. This is one of the old military hangars. This is basically us preparing for hurricanes that came through. Hurricanes never hit us, but definitely tie downs aren't going to do much with a category 2, category 3 hurricane. So we had to move everything in here. That was a huge ordeal. All the airplanes on the ramp. This is I try to find the nicest picture that I ever took. This is Coco Head volcano. It's the first volcano on the island, the oldest volcano. If you can see that mountain range behind it, the volcano you're seeing in the foreground is a speck compared to that mountain range behind it. Is actually the rim of what used to be half a volcano, and the other half sunk into the ocean, probably like millions of years ago. So a lot of natural beauty to this. I put this here because I got promoted to chief pilot while I was there. So I handled kind of all hiring. I helped get the kids involved and excited with flying there. So that was pretty cool to do. And then here I just have some very pretty pictures of this was this is my office basically. So like every time I'd go work for 7-8 hours, all I needed to do was look outside and just get reminded of, yeah, at least I'm not looking at Nebraskan cornfields or something. So this was actually Molokai. This is called Chinaman's Hat because it looks like a Chinaman's hat. It was a checkpoint that we used to report on landing. You can actually walk out to that from the beach at the top of the screen. I did that many times. Very, very beautiful. There's the airport. That's not Photoshop. It's real. Here's some more. So this on the left, that's basically the tallest waterfall in the state, because Hawaii has many different islands. This was actually Molokai, and you can see tucked in there. Couldn't fly in there, but you could see it. And obviously the photo doesn't do it justice. And on the right, this is actually the Hana Highway. It's a very, very famous highway on Maui. I think Elvis sings a song about it. I could be wrong. I think he does. This is coming into Honolulu Airport in the Honda Jet. That guy that trained me for my commercial, we would always just stay in touch. And I got to land a jet. Well, not land it, but help him with the avionics and stuff. But it was pretty cool to be in a jet on final to an international airport like Honolulu. So that was pretty cool. That was a highlight. Here's Pearl Harbor. I'm sure you recognize that. So a couple of things here. You can see the Arizona Memorial kind of like on the top right of the island. Ford Island, that's what the island's called. And then towards the lower to the screen off to the right, that's the battleship where the treaty was signed, where Japan surrendered. So it's pretty cool to see that if any of you guys go out there. And I just thought it's amazing to coming into Honolulu, this was a rare thing actually. They told me to fly direct over Ford Island, and I was like, "What? You're not supposed to fly over Ford Island," out of respect for the sailors that are still in the Arizona. There's still about 500 bodies underneath that memorial, that white structure in the water, and just out of respect for that, since Pearl Harbor, there's not really supposed to be flying around that area. So this was a pretty rare thing to fly directly over the island. And you can see in the middle of this, if you can, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a beige, looks like an old runway, and you can see the numbers sticking out, 22. That's actually where pilots, that used to be the Naval Air Station. That's where they took off, and that's where they filmed the movie Pearl Harbor. There's a better picture of the battleship. It's actually still functional. Well, it's not in service, but they could fix it up and it could actually sail, but now it's just a museum. Very cool to see the 16-inch guns on it. This is at Pearl Harbor, just taking a picture of the F-16. Pretty cool. I thought this was very surreal. It really reminded you, if you see here on the glass, those aren't teenagers throwing rocks into the glass. Those are actually the bullet holes from the Japanese Zeros that fired on the airports. So to see the gunshot holes in the windows and it's still well maintained today, it's pretty amazing to see that. It's real history right there. This is a fun one. Jurassic Park was filmed on Oahu, so they just left the bones there. Pretty cool to see that. We got to do that. Here was this is what we would do after work. I mean, after training students, all the instructors would kind of go on hikes and, go to the beach, relax, drink beer. Obviously, 8 hours bottom to throttle, but we would this is a very awesome place to work for sure. Almost done here, but this is kind of getting into now what's current events. These are all the Hawaiian Airlines that stopped flying because of COVID. They just parked them there on the runway. So it's pretty sad to see that, just how little. I've never seen that. I mean, not many people have seen that before. Just so many jets just not used, parked just on taxiways. It's kind of apocalyptic almost. But things are looking better. Flying is bouncing back. So that's kind of my journey on how I got to where I am. Always wanted to fly, and blessed with an uncle that opened up a flight school and became an instructor. This is basically where I'm waiting for the airlines to hire now. Waiting for SkyWest to hire. So hopefully within the next couple of months they open up their hiring and I get to do what I finally wanted to do. Was I love teaching, but I want to sit in those planes. What I'm doing now is, if there's anyone who's interested in flying, I'm the assistant chief instructor at Fly Bay Area, which is on the other side of the Hiller Museum. So if anyone's interested, you guys can come on by and learn to fly. But with that, are there any questions? That kind of ends my presentation.
Thank you, Micah. That was fascinating. Those of you who have some questions, go ahead and use your chat feature down at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can type in your chat right there. I'll get the ball rolling a little bit. I know I
see a couple.
You had some interesting pictures of the gusty wind conditions, and that was somebody's check ride.
Yeah.
So that's bad. But what is the wind situation? Is it chronically? I know Maui is particularly bad. And is it just bad on all the islands pretty much? Or?
Yeah, it's the trade winds. That's the reason why Hawaii is so bearable, because it's super hot, but there's always gusty breezes to keep you cool. Yeah, it was the thing about Hawaii is like you would get sustained winds from like 10 at night to 7 in the morning, and then from 7 in the morning to 10 at night, gusts every day. It was weird if there was a calm day. So that really trains students to handle the situation, and it makes them better pilots. It's like putting a donut on the bat, essentially.
Quick question in the chat from Jimmy,
Yeah.
which is, what was the reason you were given permission to fly over Pearl Harbor on that particular day?
So good question. That was during COVID, when basically there was not a lot of planes coming in. So they closed runways at Honolulu International Airport. So just, I guess, whatever ATC was doing that day, and the only runway that I could use, they had me probably divert for traffic. That's what I'm assuming. I don't know why they said clear direct Ford Island, but it's probably due to some runway closures. And again, it was a pretty cool. I see here, what survival gear do you carry? So yeah, good question. We always carried life vests, and then nitrogen explosive raft. You pull a pin and the raft explodes. That's a good question, because every single flight that we had, if it wasn't doing a maneuvers flight and we were doing long flights across countries, yeah, over open water, you're not gliding to shore. So what I always had to tell myself was that the engine doesn't know you're over water, and it's possible to survive from ditching in that. But still, yeah, it was definitely, I tell my friends, when I tell my other pilot friends, and they're like, what, you did your cross countries over the ocean? And they're like, what the heck? I would never do that. And so yeah, we according to FAA regulations, you have to carry flotation devices if you're more than gliding distance from the shoreline. I see here, what are some of the biggest differences between flying in Hawaii and the Bay Area? So we talked about weather. Weather is, it's a little bit calmer here, but it still gets pretty windy here. But I'm glad that I trained in Hawaii for that. Traffic is a lot more, way more airports, way more airspaces than Hawaii. So that's different. Just being used to all the airspaces and radio communication. Lighting, we kind of talked about that. If you weren't over Waikiki, pitch black, and you could only see like little pineapple field lights here and there, but it's not, I mean, there's 800,000 people on the island of Oahu. So if you're on the south side of the island, it looks like a normal city. It looks well lit, but anywhere else, good luck finding, I mean, you could still see lights, but it was very dark. How many years have you been an aviator? So I first flew in 2007. In 7th grade. That was my first flight. And then so I landed a plane before I drove a car. So there's some other kids at the flights museum that can say that too. But yeah, it's always been in my blood, for sure. Are there still any military aircraft? Kaneohe Bay, I modeled that airport. Oh, wow. Cool. Yeah, there are. There's C-17s that land there. Kaneohe is the Marine Corps base. So the cool thing about Oahu is every branch of the military is represented. So you got Hickam Air Force Base, you got Pearl Harbor, which is the Navy base, you got Wheeler, which is the Army base, Kaneohe Marines, and at our airport, Kalaeloa, we had the Coast Guard station. So yeah, there's lots of planes there. Ospreys, the V-22 Ospreys are still at Kaneohe, C-17s, and the Apaches and Cobras. Yeah.
Looks like you have a technical question about your camera setup. Have you ever done 3D pictures with a standard camera? Interesting
3D
question.
pictures. No, I haven't. I have a GoPro, and that's one of my biggest regrets. I don't know. I never pulled it out while flying in Hawaii. I took pictures, I took videos, but yeah, everything's on an iPhone. I could have done better in the photography department.
You had mentioned the 747 pilot, the test pilot who had stalled the 747. What was his name again?
Raymond Johns.
Raymond Johns. Did he fly for Boeing, basically? Because we have film of a 747 stalling in a test flight. And I was just curious.
Yeah.
Maybe he was.
Yeah, I don't know. I just maybe I'm not sure. Maybe that was him, but I don't know. That's a good question. But he definitely was involved. He's tested so many aircraft in his career.
What is your uncle doing now with the COVID thing? What happened to the flight school? Did it kind of go into a time
So
out? Or-
I have no idea why, but the flight school became the profitable side of the business, and the fueling side became the not profitable side because the Air Force stopped sending the jets to him. So it worked out perfectly. The fueling side definitely died down. Now it's kind of bouncing back. So they still getting instructors, still getting new aircraft, and the fueling business is still there. I see here a question about Dillingham. Yeah, that airport, that's where I did my commercial single engine. It's I don't think it will, just knowing how the state is. I mean, without getting into politics, the state's not very kind to stuff like that. So I think it will shut down. I actually, funny story. I landed at Dillingham. My battery died at Dillingham, so I had to call the mechanic from the other side of the island. And when we charged it, he fixed it. I'm ready to go start the airplane, but then airport security comes out and they're like, "You can't take off." I was like, "What?" And like, "Yeah, it's closed to the military from sunset to sunrise." So I was like, "Well, it's my bad for not checking that. I should have known that." But it's only open to the civilians during the day. And with all the there's like 2 or 3 crashes that happened when I was there, skydiving pilots. And it's all money. It's right on a beach. The state is always going to push commercial residential over an airport that's not making a lot of money. It's a money thing. I think it's going to shut down. So I think the only non-military / international airport left on the island will be my uncle's, where he's at.
One thing about your comments about the flight simulation, I found resonated with me personally. I remember being really into flight simulation when I was, probably older than you were. Back in the 90s. I think I was, in my late 30s. But I did a calculation. I realized that I was spending more money on the flight simulator and all the video cards and all of the peripherals and I decided, why don't I just take flight lessons? So at some point you do reach an interesting transition where, well, instead of doing flight simulation, just get in a real airplane. So, but that did resonate with me because, a lot of people, discount flight simulation, but the facts are that it's really been inspiring for a whole generation of pilots. I mean, it is how people have gotten into aviation and it has a real power that way. So flight schools, I know, are beginning to use it more and more. And obviously there are good ways to use it and useless ways to use it in flight training, because it can't teach you how to do primary, flight maneuvers and things like that. But
it's a familiarity issue. Like just being familiar with the gauges goes a long way.
Yeah, it looks like there are other people in the audience too who are into flight simulation. So,
yeah.
Well, Micah, I really appreciate you coming in and spending some time with us. It's good to see you back here in the Bay Area and to get an inspiring glimpse into being a flight instructor in paradise.
Yes, thank you guys.
And we're going to upload your talk to YouTube. There may be some copyright issues with some of your music on it, but we'll see.
Crap, I forgot about that.
We'll find out when we upload to YouTube. Usually they'll have something to say about it. But
I have to put Hawaiian music somewhere.
Yeah, I'll put some Hawaiian music on or something, or hum along. But anyway, so look for that on our museum YouTube channel in a day or so. And don't forget to join us again 2 weeks from now for a talk on the evolution of the B-17 tailgun by Nick Veronico on April 28th at 7 o'clock. So in the meantime, stay safe, everybody. We'll look forward to seeing you here at the Hiller Aviation Museum this weekend. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye. Good night.